Hey Ryan, it's great to connect with you today. Wanted to just talk to you a little bit today about AI and your ideas on AI. Would you tell me a little bit about your role day to day and what your kind of skill set is? And that will help us kind of tie that into some of our conversation about AI.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michael. My name's Ryan, and I run Masuva Limited, which has been a web development house for. I've been doing it since 2011, running it out of the UK now, but previously Australia. And you and I have done a lot of work together, lots of projects, and that's where I think my side of it on the technical, but yours is very much on sort of marketing and promotion and design and the vision for things.
Yeah.
So lately we've been talking, you and I, just sort of casually about, well, how is AI fitting into our workflows? But we're a bit different because the way that you've been using it and the way I've been using it is sort of similar, but we're coming up from slightly different angles. And
Yeah.
uh, so over the last 2 weeks in particular, I've been making a real effort to just try out some of the tools that people have been recommending and integrating into their processes, just to sort of get more of a feel for how they can be used. Um, I have been using them for at least, I would say, 4 or 5 months. I've been hopping on some, ChatGPT or Gemini for just some help and assistance, kind of like bounce, like almost like a second developer, just another person to
Yeah.
say, hey, why is this not working, or whatever. But I've started to use it a bit more to say, actually, can you build this for me, or can you write this for me?
Yeah.
But how long have you been using AI for?
Uh, I would say maybe since about November. I mean, maybe before that, but it was always like I'm just jumping into ChatGPT, just asking it questions, just like I would Google as a search engine. And then when I really thought, I want to explore AI tools and what they can do, and I kind of categorized them. So I built this spreadsheet, and I started just throwing in AI tools, what they could do, what they cost, what I thought I could do with them in terms of a business model to make money from them. But let's go into one thing you mentioned to me before we jumped on this call, because you're I would say you're more analytical than I am. I kind of jump into these things. I'm
I don't
just
know. You just build a spreadsheet.
oh yeah,
That's pretty
yeah.
good to me. Yeah.
But you said that you were also looking at kind of how AI worked. Can you tell me a little bit about what you found about how AI agents actually work?
Yeah, I think the thinking about that and AI's how it's actually working behind the scenes comes a little bit back to my background is very much in sort of broader technology. I sort of studied it at uni, and I studied teaching technology, and which is very much about critiquing what we're using everyday technology. And I think um, when when computers first sort of were introduced, there was only a subset of people that really understood how they work, mathematicians and computer scientists. But over time, it's become one of those things where you might not know the finer details, and really no one knows the finer details how a processor works. We still have an appreciation to say, oh, okay, it's crunching some information, it's got inputs and outputs, and we know there's lots of maths, lots of stuff going on, and we think about even like a car or some other piece of technology, we have an appreciation for, you know, there's an engine and the engine works a certain way. And then we start getting to some of the bigger tech like search engines, and even a search engine, um, the average person might not really know how to describe it, but anyone in technology sort of works on the web would be able to say, oh yeah, Google has thousands of servers and it has a huge database, and it indexes websites and it pulls all this information in, and it's got some very clever tricks to allow you to type in a search and get your result. So we can still understand it from how it broadly works. I think the challenge, and I think why AI at the moment is hugely sort of, it's in a big, it's everyone's talking about it and there's a flux, is because to a lot of people, it's still seeming like magic. You'll ask ChatGPT to answer a question, and suddenly you're getting this intelligence back that you go, how did it even know to be that clever and to come up with the results? Or, how was it creative? Or how did it solve that problem? And I think that's where we are treating it now as this absolute magic black box that we're putting questions into and getting results out, and we don't have a clue about how that's working. And so I think a lot of people are seeing it, that they're still almost fearful that it's an intelligence. It's sitting there, it's thinking, it's doing stuff. But my very, very low layman's understanding of AI is that the way that it works is that you have a thing called data sets. So you have, it might be something like 1 million images, photos, that each photo has some text alongside it. So it might say picture of a dog. And then you might have another one that says picture of a car. And then you might have another one that says picture of a dog next to a car. And what these AI platforms do is they look over this entire set of information and they crunch all these photographs and the corresponding text about them down into really what is just a bunch of numbers. And they normally refer to them as vectors. But all we really have to think about is saying, well, okay, we've got a bunch of numbers that represents this photo and a bunch of numbers that represents this photo. And you doing some very, very clever maths, we can say, well, the photo of the dog and the photo in the car and the photo of the car with the dog all kind of relate because they start to have commonalities between them. We can see, and this is hugely simplifying how it works, but those numbers that we're getting down to at the end start to have some relationship to each other because the things that we're reading and feeding into the data model relate. So it might be 1 million books, or it might be 10 million web pages with documentation, or it could be legal. It could be legal cases. Someone's feeding in that to process every line of every legal case that's ever been looked at. So then what happens, and this is the weird bit, is that when we ask something like ChatGPT a question, it looks at our prompt, so the bit of information we type in, and it turns that into a set of numbers in the same way. So a set of vectors. And then what it says, right, I'm going to try and start somewhere and start creating and doing some iterations over my starting point to try and get a bunch of numbers and outputs that will effectively match up with your input. So it's kind of like the best guess that it can do. So it might, and the bit that's weird is that if you're creating an image with AI, the starting point for AI is actually a piece of random noise. So it might be just static. And it takes that random noise and it goes, okay, let's change it slightly in the direction of all of the numbers that might make it more closely fit the answer that will fit what your prompt is. And it'll make a little change. And then it'll go, is that closer or is it further away? And then it'll do it again. And it'll keep trying and trying over and over. So the image, imagine the image going from this blurry, fuzzy thing, slowly starts coming into focus every time it's processing it down. And the same works with text. It might not be an image, but it might start almost with some random text and then start formulating down to say, well, what's the final piece of text that mathematically matches against your request? But the weird bit is the fact that at each point it introduces a little bit of randomness. So that's why when you ask ChatGPT or one of the image generators to generate an image, it's generally not the same answer every time. If you said, oh, I want a picture of a dog next to a car, if you didn't ask, if there was no randomness involved, what you're going to get is the most generic, averaged picture of a dog and a car that would be absolutely boring. They're almost like blurry and fuzzy, the most generic versions with no detail or no specifics about it. It's like the average of all dogs and the average of all cars. But by introducing a little bit of noise along the way, it randomizes it. And suddenly the dog is a Labrador and the car is a certain model of car. But then you ask for it again, well, you might get two different, completely different visuals for it. So it's not sitting there thinking, it's still an input and an output. But what it feels is kind of magic in the middle of like, how did it go between those two, the inputs and outputs? Well, it's still maths, it's still computing. It's just using a completely enormous amount of information to randomly but slowly get to a final point. Does that seem like an okay description?
It does, it connects with a question that comes to mind, and maybe you've read about this or not, about Cloudflare trying to introduce an element to stop AI from being able to search particular content, because there's an argument at the moment that AI is just basically going out there and without any sort of policing, it just takes whatever content it wants to come up with this mathematical answer that you're talking about. So what do you think about that? Do you think Cloudflare has got a good idea in that concept?
I think it's a huge problem because, as you know, my wife is an author, and her writing community, they had the publishers and authors, like there was almost like an open letter that came and said, hey, we don't want our books indexed by these large language models, by these AIs, because it feels like it's on the edge of plagiarism. If you say, I would like you to write a paragraph, novel style prose describing this, and this, and suddenly ChatGPT goes, oh, I've got all this information that I can make something that sounds very similar to what your prompt is, but what you've described is basically a particular author's writing style. It's just going to give you the best fit, and if the best fit is something that is effectively copied from somewhere else, there starts to be a real question there of, well, is that moral? Is that okay to be representing someone else's, copying someone else's work that way? Whether or not we can stop it, it's a legal question really than anything else. But the other one I read the other day, I was talking to a photographer that I've worked with, at least 12 years. We've built his website and whatever, and he was telling me that there's a trend in America where models, so fashion models, makeup models, they're getting their faces scanned and processed, and then they're fed into some image generation AI, and then the whoever's wanting to do the fashion shoot is saying, I want the model to be in this pose, looking this way, this makeup on. The model is being paid, say, 60, 50% of the normal work commission they'd get. They're not doing any work. And so you, on the surface, you go, oh, that sounds great for them. They're getting money for nothing, doing no time. But then there's no lighting people, there's no makeup people, there's no set designers, set builders, there's no catering, there's no, the people that might get the taxi rides of bringing people to a set. All of those positions have sort of been removed. And I think from whether or not that it's great for some, but the question is a bit more of like, should we be doing this? And should we be allowing unfettered access to, you can index all of the books. And to talk about Lolita's books, her books, we know, are in an AI large language model. We've looked, you can search for them and you can find them. So, and I think her feeling was like, can't stop it, but it feels a bit questionable whether or not it's okay. But I don't have an answer for that one. It's a tricky one.
It seems to me almost like if you think about cybersecurity, the battle between hackers and the protectors, if you like. So
arms race.
Yeah, it seems like Cloudflare, like, okay, well, we offer this service for security and these other services. So we'll offer one more service, and this is the layer of protection, and we protect your content on your website from AI searching. But so you said you'd kind of had a thought, or maybe had an internal list of maybe pros and cons from a development standpoint
Yeah.
of AI.
Yeah. Look, I think from a programmer's point of view, I'm not really dealing in the creative space. I'm so at least the kind of work that I do is very much building systems for businesses or applications. I'm trying to solve problems. So then when it comes to an AI assistant with something I'm coding, I'm wanting, accuracy. I'm wanting correctness. I'm wanting best practice. And what I'm finding is that it's very good at that. So I can say, look, here's a bit of code, and the AI assistant will come back and say, oh, actually, that's great, but you've done this wrong. I had it fix a typo in just some spelling the other day. I didn't ask it to fix it, but when it looked at my code and said, yeah, you've asked me to change this. By the way, I've also fixed your spelling as well. I was like, okay, that's like having another person sitting next to me over my shoulder,
Yeah.
kind of working with me.
So was that a syntax then?
No, no, no. As in, it was literally just it was a typo in the label on the form
Oh,
that
okay.
it just said, oh, I noticed that this was spelt wrong, so I fixed it.
Hmm.
Okay, that's great. And so, but from my perspective, this is where I think AI is amazing, is that you can tell AI, go off and look at this documentation, or it might have already read in the past a whole bunch of documentation. But you can tell it now, especially with things like Gemini. You can. There's a button that says deep learning, and you hit that, and you can tell it, I want you to go off and read this documentation, something it might not have seen before, and then it will infer with the other knowledge it's got to then answer questions about it in the time that it might take you to, it might take you an hour to read that doco. It might take me 10 seconds to feed it that, and then it's become an expert effectively in that. And I've used it across the last week to help me set up some servers and debug some things. And from my perspective, I can't have every piece of knowledge about the IT world in my head, but that's where like Google and all the documentation is fantastic. But I still have to spend time to read that, understand it, and it's not necessarily helping me achieve my goals as a business to build applications for people. So if I've got an assistant that sort of is this knowledgeable, brainstorming expertise of the code that I'm looking at, I've still got control over what I'm building, and I can direct that AI to say, look, I'm trying to build this. I want to build it this way. These are the standards that I'm wanting to use. Here's the technologies I'm wanting to use. But then it can come along and say, yep, here's some code for you. Here's some things that you might want to review. It even will check security and say, here's a security consideration. And from my perspective, I've been using tools like that before AI to help my code, auto completion, checking, validation. This almost feels just like the next step up, the evolution of that. Well, I either sort of adopt those practices, or I will fall behind and be slower and just not as competitive with anyone else who's doing similar work to me.
Yeah.
But that's different to, I think, I know that you're using it a bit more, say, for content creation, or at least prompting. Like, how does that feel for you in terms of, are you finding the tools are a big pro for you, or have you got mixed feelings?
I think they're a big pro, but I think it's like you said, it's about how you envisage how to use them. So
Mm.
as I've been going through experiments with all sorts of AI tools, I'm finding some that are not great and I'm finding some that are good. So it's like a mental checklist. Like, okay, well, if I want to do this, I'm going to use this tool because I know that it'll get the output that I want. So,
By
like,
the way, but just what are some of the, like, I know ChatGPT and I know
yeah,
Gemini and
yeah.
I know Claude, and because that's a big coding one. But are there some out there that are kind of lesser known that you think should be more known, or?
So I think Perplexity is a big one. So
Okay.
Perplexity is a lot like some of the engines like Gemini or ChatGPT, in that you can type questions into Perplexity and get results and answers. But it's really been touted as being a research model because it really goes deep into scholarly resources.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the challenges with using a search engine to search for topics is, if there's so much fluff out there that's not even accurate or
Filtering.
factual in any way. So I
Yeah.
think Perplexity is a good one because it does talk about it being a research model for like PhD level materials. So
Okay.
Perplexity is pretty good. I think image generation stuff, what I've found is with any of them that I've tried, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or one I was using called Leonardo,
Yep.
is um, they don't handle text very well. Like
I've
it's a bit
noticed that.
hit and miss
Yeah.
where they sometimes, like, so I was doing a book cover design and then I'm just like, okay, well, I don't want it to do text. So I just, in my prompt, I'll just tell it not to include text, and then I'll build text onto it with other tools. But I think what I'm using Gemini and Chat GPT the most for is emails, outreach, brainstorming content. So, for example, let's say I've got conflict resolution to deal with a difficult client, and so I just
Yeah.
go, okay, I've written my email. I'm not sure that it's good. I'll put it into ChatGPT and say, create an email that is friendly and engaging but direct
Yeah.
toward this output, towards this outcome. Like, this person hasn't been paying for a while. I want to make sure that there isn't some problems for them financially at the moment, and then I'll take that. Or I'm doing a LinkedIn outreach at the moment, and I'm just connecting to new people. What's a nice way to engage with new people
Yeah.
with this outcome? Like, I want to maybe book an appointment with them. So stuff like that.
Do you
And then
feel
it's
that
quick. Yeah.
carries enough of your own personality into what you're producing? Like, how do you resolve it feeling a bit too much like it's been written by ChatGPT? Like,
Because usually I start it. So usually I don't. In some cases, if I want something really quick, I'm just like, here's the prompt. But in most cases, I say, okay, this is an email. This is an example of an email that I've written. Please write something in my voice. Or here's an email I'm about to send. Just simplify it a little bit. So it's
yeah, yeah,
just kind of taking out, maybe there's too many adverbs, or maybe my sentence structure is a bit long because I'm a bit waffly,
yeah.
so stuff like that.
I think to me that's kind of the key about it's almost a generational thing in terms of that you and I do remember what life was like before the internet. You
Yeah.
know, we do, and we know what life was like before search engines. And so the idea of us being sort of the starting point for anything, even just the thinking in the first place, is not foreign to us.
Yeah.
So, I will say I need to build a project that does this. You might say I need to write some text that has this in it. Then you're using the AI and I'm using the AI to sort of augment what we're doing and to supplement it. I
Yeah.
think my broader concern, and this is is what happens when we've got a generation of, teenagers, young people coming in that not only have they not experienced the world before Google, but they're going to be so used to using ChatGPT to solve all their problems that my concern is that even the deeper thinking or even the practice of writing language or understanding how to write language a certain way, those skills could end up being quite rare because everyone is just saying, I'm going to start my entire day with AI. AI is doing all of that. And my fear is things like, mistakes and weirdness is the word I had on my notes here. Weirdness,
Queerness, yeah.
right? About humans and the way that we write things is important. It is important to be wrong and to make mistakes because sometimes those things are actually where discoveries are made or where, we have, even just phrasing something a certain way might carry personality that someone that or a meaning that so because it's not that often that I receive messages from clients that I go, oh, that's clearly ChatGPT or whatever.
Yeah.
But I can definitely feel when a client has spent time thinking about a really measured answer or thinking really deeply, because you can feel it in the language or whatever they're producing. And I'm my concern is, are we going to end up with sort of lots of workers, lots of people producing things that is the average of everything. So it's like no personality, no quirkiness, no weirdness. Like, so for your example of writing maybe almost a formal letter to someone, you want it to be strict, but I think you were getting people now writing almost personal emails to people using ChatGPT because they go, "Oh, it's saving me time." But what are we missing when they're doing that from the thought process? Because
Yeah.
they're not thinking it through; they're just letting it do its work. So my concern is sort of longer down the track, that we might be in the creative side of things. Just we're going to end up with the average of everything, a bland kind of cookie cutter response to everything. And I feel like that's the bit that I feel a bit like pushing back against.
Yeah.
Um,
There's all sorts of challenges, I think, with the evolution of technology and especially with AI. But if I track back to when I was starting my career, and back then I was really interested. I've always liked creation, but I was really interested in creation in terms of illustration, design, and all those kind of things. And even 20 years ago, when I would look for jobs, as the internet was starting to evolve, I'd be looking for a graphic design job, thinking this is art. And
yeah.
it would be like, but you need HTML and you need this skill and you need this skill. And I'm like, I don't know any of those things. How am I going to be competitive in my market if I don't know any of those skills? And then fast forwarding now 20 years, I've done project management, I've done a little bit of coding, I've done some design, I'm now working with AI. So I've become a generalist, almost because of my role out of necessity. And so do you think that there's a lot of talk at the moment about, you learn these AI tools and you can be a business owner and you can do all of these things because AI has the sophistication to help you do all of these things. So do you think that specialties are going to slowly kind of go away because there's a necessity in the next generations to generalize and use AI tools to fill in the gaps?
Well, I think that would be a concern that I've got, and like, whilst I hear what you're saying about you having sort of a generalist of skill sets, I think that you might be neglecting the fact that your skills and experience to look at a business and say, right, let's understand that business, let's analyze that business, and what do they need, what are their marketing needs, how can we offer their services a certain way. That's a deeper level of thinking that might just come naturally to you, but I wouldn't call that a general skill.
Okay.
And so that's where it's that kind of experience. So, your 20, 30 years of understanding a topic and all the pros and cons, but also the creativity that comes from like creatively solving a problem. My concern is that it's not so much the knowledge, it's the exercise and the thought process that people are not going to have any practice in. So, like, if I build a system, and I'm building management systems for businesses that they're running every day, they're running every day their business is open, they're using them for 2 or 3 hours, maybe more. And I've got some systems that are now 9, 10 plus years old, and they've been maintained or whatever, but they're essentially the same system because they were built to meet a need in the first place, and they keep ticking on. But those clients can come to me and go, Ryan, can you just tweak this? Or we've had a change in the way that we're calculating this. Can you tweak that? And I go, yep, no worries. I can still jump into the code and change it. I think my concern is that if you've got this generation of people using these tools to build anything these days, they're building it almost like it's the minimum viable product. Like, get it to market, get something out there, get it ready. And then 5 years down the track, is that same person going to have the skills to jump in again and fix something or correct something? Because if they don't understand the code, because they didn't understand it in the first place, well, they're not going to be able to know where to go to fix that. But the tools that they used to build in the first place may not even exist anymore. They might have evolved into some other platform. They might not even know where even the code for their system lives. It might be on some paid platform that's just doing something.
Mhm.
So not only have we shortcut to get to these end products, but we've also forgotten for the person who might be responsible for them to even know how they work, or even just the basic, behind the curtain of like, yeah, I know if that went wrong, or if a system crashes, suddenly a database corrupts. Well, if you don't have at least some technical knowledge, or at least know how to find the answers because you know what questions to ask, if you've got none of that because you've grown up doing all of your thinking and all of your research with AI tools and never learned it yourself, you might be able to ask an AI to help you, but that might be such an incredibly painful process to get that, especially 5-10 years down the track. Sometimes looking at a code base a year on feels like it's ancient. So
Yeah.
10 years down the track. And so the tools themselves, I don't think I have a problem with. I think they're fantastic. What I have a concern is it's going to make people a little too lazy to understand the fundamentals about business, about software development, about even good creative design, principles of that. They develop something and then they go, is it good or bad? Well, I don't know. I don't care. And it starts to be, we're not the deeper level of any profession and their experience. It's not so much that it's going to erode away what we've got. It's the fact that no one's going to come into that space for the next generation of experts. That's, without being too harrowing, that's my broader concern.
Yeah. So I think that together we can agree that we can see pros and cons, but we still both agree strongly on the human element of these tools. That's why I said, I built this spreadsheet. I went through tools, and some of them really were garbage.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at the output from maybe a different perspective. Like you said, even though I might call myself a generalist, I've got experience, so I can look at something and say, well, did the output produce a good layout? Did it produce a
Yeah.
layout that had accurate spelling or text or whatever? And you're on the code side, you can say the same thing. You can say, well, okay, this output was good. This output was not good. Why was it good or why was it bad?
Yeah.
But
It's
we're
not
saying that,
perfect. It's never perfect. It might save some time, but there's plenty of times I'm getting it to generate some code. I'm going, oh, fantastic, but I need to change that, or that's not right. Or developers are now producing entire applications. They call it, the term is vibe coding.
yeah,
They're doing that, and then they're going, oh my god, I've been hacked. I've been attacked by. I don't know what I'm doing. And they go, certain responsibilities, and even like you saying, oh, is this layout good? Well, good. What's good? Good is not a that is subjective, but that comes down to your experience of it being good. So then you got, well, a young person go, well, it's perfect, isn't it? That's that weird sort of line that I feel like it's not that we have to be fearful of it, it's that we have to be conscious that that's what we're doing as a society, I think.
Yeah, but in terms of content and information, we've been accelerating at such a pace in the last 10 years where I wonder, for you and I, we're looking at it from our perspective and how we've grown up in the world of minimal web technology to all of this web technology and smartphones and all these kind of different devices and stuff. And obviously, like my son, 25, and then younger than that, they're a different generation. They're born into this generation of all this technology. I'm looking at it from the perspective of where I go, okay, well, if I look at stuff online and only 1 in 5 or 6 things is factual or accurate in any way, but it doesn't seem to matter because the other stuff's popular too. In fact, maybe more popular. So this junk is popular. It's a bit concerning that information is changing in how the value of information is perceived is changing.
Yeah. A good example of that is, again, I'm using it, the AI sort of responses on a technical level. So I want it to answer questions. Say, I'm getting this error. I've written this code. Here's the code. I'm getting this error. Why might that be? And it's the kind of question I might ask a colleague, or I might ask someone online, or I might go on a forum and paste that. the difference is that the AI is going to immediately have an answer for me and come straight back. But the reason it's got an answer is often because it's scoured all of the Stack Overflow and all of these sort of big forums with technical answers. And I've seen cases where I've been talking to Gemini, and Gemini gives me an example, and then I've found the exact example on the documentation page that's related. So it's pulled it from the right place. My concern is that if no one is writing that stuff anymore on Stack Overflow or on, everyone says, oh, I don't need to write a documentation page for this piece of technology because, the AIs will kind of handle that, then those systems have got nothing to be fed in new.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So then it's going to slowly get less and less accurate over time because those things are built on the backs of the hard work of people writing the content in the first place. So, creative stuff, if you're feeding in novels to a large language model, that's millions of hours of hard work of people being creative. But if people aren't writing anything creative anymore, there's going to be a point where it's got nothing more to grow on and it can't grow back on itself. It can't write content because they've tested this. They've said, if you get ChatGPT to write some content to then absorb back into its model, you end up with nonsense because it needs human input. And that human input, we need to still be creative. We still need to be producing human written, including mistakes, things on the web. And I don't want to be reading a web that 10 out of 11 articles are AI generated because it just ends up being mess and noise of, no value to it.
Yeah, so that ties back to wrap up our conversation. That ties back to what you were talking about in the beginning about how AI worked and the interpretation of data in mathematics.
Yeah.
So if its source is data that already exists, that's been created by other people, and so you're saying if that source goes away, if you take ChatGPT and you say, okay, well, you have no source to pull from.
Yeah.
I want you to do this. It can't do it.
Well, it can't create new answers to things. So you might be able to tweak it and get sort of more from the information. But I think the analogy is if you put a human in a white room with no exits, no doors, no windows, no input, just a white room, they can't learn anything. They might come up with some creative stuff based on things they already know. But unless you feed them books or feed them television or something new, you really can't have new knowledge. You might have new thoughts, but not new knowledge. So you can't learn anything. And that's what would happen to a large language model, that we're feeding it more information than an individual will ever read in their lifetime. So that's why they're so impressive at the moment. It knows something about everything. But new technology comes along, or new styles, or new could be just new knowledge. If it doesn't have something to feed into it, like it could be, you might feed it news articles. You might read today's news every day. It's feeding that in, and then it's then got something to kind of consume. But if the news is written by AI, it's not going to learn new writing styles. It's not going to learn nuance of political opinion or any of that sort of stuff. It's only just going to learn facts. And so there's a lot of researchers looking at sort of, there's going to be a limit to how intelligent and how productive these things can be. And I feel my gut feeling is that we don't want to just stop producing everything because it's cheaper to use AI. There's a hidden cost to that, and I think there's a balancing act to say, look, no, humans need to be producing things, and we use AI to get rid of the boring tasks and the repetitive tasks, like any good bit of technology really should be doing. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for
philosophical.
I mean, there's so much more we can go into. That's the good thing. It's such a huge topic. Right now, the the fronds of the web of what AI is and its capabilities, its pros and cons, it just keeps going. So
Might be in a year's time, we might need another one of these chats.
yeah,
And what we actually talk about, it might be, we might, in comparison, this might seem like we're talking just silly circles in comparison to what's coming up. We never know.
no, no. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Ryan, and the
That's
conversation
right.
was enlightening. I've got lots to think about.
Awesome. Right. Speak
All
soon.
right, thank you.